Welcome back to the penultimate session, which is a word I get to use far less than I would like in life. The penultimate session of day one of IDTX 2024. Thank you for joining us, Holly, for this session. And
I'm
thank you to everyone
excited.
for, joining us so late in the day, at least in the UK. I kind of have this mindset of UK time zone. I'm aware that for a
You're
lot of
good.
people, it's like the morning or the middle of the day.
Yep.
Great. For those that have joined us so far and stayed for the whole day, thank you. For those joining us just now, hey, welcome. Nice to have you with us. Here we go. We've already got some comments coming in, just saying hello, marvelous. I would encourage you all get involved in the chat. Ask questions. We're going to cover questions at the end, but please do feel free to kind of rack them up during the talk, and then I can pull them through onto screen at the end. But you've all heard quite enough from me, so I'm going to get off the stage. Holly, away you go.
All right. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen so I can share my presentation. I'm excited to be here at IDTX. I'm so looking forward to sharing this information and presentation with you. So, hi, I'm sitting in the United States right now and on the East Coast. So it's about lunchtime here for us. But welcome to an insider's perspective, making the leap from educator to instructional designer. I'm going to talk about my journey from being a high school teacher into currently where I sit as an instructional designer at Amazon Pharmacy. But I also wanted to share a lot of tips and tricks with you on how I got here, especially for those of you who are looking to transition yourselves or just thinking about a professional transition. I definitely want to make sure that you leave this session with some things that you can take with you that are applicable to what you're doing right now. If you are in the job market, if you're thinking about the job market in the next 3 to 6 months, even the next year. So welcome. A little bit about me before I jump into things. So I've been, went ahead. Let's not pop too far ahead. So I've been an instructional designer with Amazon for about 2 years now, but I am not at the beginning of my career. I started my career way back in 2007 as a high school educator and fell in love with educational technology. And from there, I transitioned into higher education, instructional design, bounced around a few institutions in higher education, and then eventually ended up in some things that you might hear the dogs barking here. I eventually transitioned into some higher education instructional design and then some things on the peripheral of instructional design. Definitely have done some freelance work in instructional design. And currently, I'm an instructional designer with Amazon Pharmacy. Yes, Amazon has a pharmacy, a full fledged digital pharmacy. So I am really enjoying this role and learning about all the different things in the corporate space. I also teach adjunct and have been doing so for approximately 6 years at Toro University. And prior to that, I taught at different institutions adjunct. So I've been doing that since 2012. So I just love this field. I love this sector. I love this community. Instructional design, instructional tech, learning experience design. So that's a little bit about me. I want to know a little bit about you. So this is called a Slido. So if you are on your computer, you can open up a different tab and go to slido.com and then enter in this information. Or if you have your phone up, you can scan that QR code and you can join the session. I want to know, what is your current role? So get an idea of who we have out there in the audience, seeing who is joining us today. And there is an other. So if these don't necessarily fit your current role, what is your role? So are you in the K to 12 space, higher education? Are you in ed tech? Are you an entrepreneur, freelancer? Okay, we got, as I suspected, about 50% educators in the room, which is great. I love that. I love talking to educators. Hi, everyone that's saying hi. I would love it if in the chat you could type in also where you are dialing in from, not dialing, you know, coming in from. I would love to see where everybody is from. All right, we have some ed tech people in here, administrators, K to 12, and definitely some others. That's great. So, instructional design definitely is something where there's a lot of different sectors, there's a lot of different fields. So, I'd imagine that other means like in marketing, um, curriculum development, those different types of things, e learning development. So, thank you so much for answering that question. And I do have a few more throughout the session. All right. So, one of the questions out there in LinkedIn world, I get a lot of different questions about instructional design in the training field, LXD, L&D, and what is happening in our sector. So I did some research and I went to the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and the ID field especially is going to grow in the next few years. So the next 5 years, they're going to experience about a 6% growth in education and government. So as we went throughout COVID and people, were thinking about like how to manage their different training activities, their learning experiences, instructional designers became really popular. I've never seen so many jobs that list instructional designer on different teams like Sephora, 84 Lumber, Hardee's, you name it. Teams are hiring instructional designers to come join them and create such immersive and meaningful learning experiences. So, definitely in the fields of education and government, this field is expected to grow. And then, if we think about overall, there's going to be a 9% growth for training and development specialists. So, any things on the peripheral of instructional design, things that, like ed tech, training, all those different things are the field is definitely growing. And people always ask me, can I get a job in this sector? Definitely, especially since the field is continuing to grow. So for the session today, I'd like to take some time to just walk you through what the differences are between teaching and versus instructional design, and talking about some of those translatable skills that educators might have. Also, too, I definitely want to pop in, and I won't have enough time to talk about in descriptive detail all the different sectors of instructional design that exist, but we'll get very top level, and then some common questions. Common questions I get asked. I run a podcast called Ed Up Ed Tech. So a lot of people ask me different questions about, do I need a certificate in ID? Do I need to get a degree in ID in order to get a role in this? What kind of opportunities are there for experiences? And then finally, I want to finish things off by giving you some great resources that you can go out and use right away and start looking at and maybe transitioning into a different role and or upskilling in your current role. So some tips and resources for you as you start to think about this journey. All right. So teaching versus instructional design. Really, what's the difference? Lots of recently, put in a post-COVID world, there has been, especially out on LinkedIn and other communities, the transitioning teachers group. People are looking to get out of education, which is, basically telling education there should be some changes there. But I think it's wonderful that former educators are jumping into this space and they want to learn more about instructional design and bring some of the skills they have as a classroom teacher or a higher education professional. I've seen professors transition into instructional design as well. And obviously, I've seen people transition from the education space to corporate or corporate to government or nonprofit. Um, so when we're thinking about, and this is very top level, there's tons of other differences when it comes to teaching versus instructional design. But at the very top level, when we think about our theories and things that we base K to 12 and instructional design off of, the first big difference is between pedagogy and andragogy. So pedagogy focus more on the younger learners and the activities that are stimulating their minds and what we're designing lessons and learning objectives and activities for them to get to a certain endpoint. And then in instructional design, it's adult learning theory. So adults learn differently than children most of the time. And there's different types of activities that you want to think about when you're an instructional designer designing for adults. You obviously want things to be completely applicable to what they're doing in their current roles. It may be upskilling, it may be doing different tasks in their roles, maybe doing some sort of simulation where they are navigating a certain system. Whereas pedagogy, we're just kind of scaffolding, we're kind of bringing in, maybe introducing them to new topics and different things. So there is a difference there. When it comes to teaching, when we talk about the audience, we're talking about we have the same students, whether that's through class periods or whether that's through the entire year in like elementary or primary school. We have the same learners and we get to know them really, really well. We know what makes them excited. We know what types of, preferences they have when it comes to learning. So we get to know them really, really extremely well in the K to 12 space. But then when you think about instructional design and andragogy, your audience is going to vary. For those of you that work in corporate, it could be customer care agents, it could be people, new hires, onboarding. So the audience varies quite vastly when you're thinking about the learning experiences that you're designing. And then when we're thinking and we're talking about the stakeholder space, so in teaching, we really have the admin, the leadership that's involved in the school at the school district level. And then with instructional design, we have those SMEs, we have those stakeholders that we're working with to develop the content and get the information as accurate as possible. So we have the admins who are making decisions, and then we have the SMEs and the stakeholders who are influencing and creating the content for us instructional designers to create those learning experiences. In teaching, we have lesson planning. And the teachers in the room, you know this very well. You may have a format that you use with writing your learning objectives, what activities you're doing, what materials you need, what resources. And in instructional design, we call that project management. So we're doing different things like we're saying we think backwards. We do backward design and we're like, okay, so we have to design a new hire training for a group of people who are onboarding into a new role into the company. So if we think backwards, how do we do that? Where do we want this end result? We want people to feel comfortable and confident in their new roles, but how are we going to get them to this point? So we have the project management. How long is phase one going to take? Phase two, phase three, and thinking about all the different pieces that fit into that. Lesson planning is more narrow, where you're thinking about just one lesson and all the different pieces that fit into that particular lesson. And you also might find that you are looking at, different types of units and things. You might go a little bit bigger when you're planning out your lessons so that you plan the units as well. That's a little bit of project management. These are very much related. I'm not saying these things exist in a vacuum, but because these things can overlap between these two industries. Teachers, grading takes over your life. You do a lot of different grading, that providing that feedback to learners, giving them information about where they went wrong or what they need to do to improve certain areas. And one of the things I want to mention in instructional design is that we do a lot of storyboarding and get feedback that way, or rapid prototyping. So that e-learning development, getting different reviews done, and our feedback comes from the stakeholders themselves. So we're getting graded as instructional designers from our stakeholders and SMEs, and also those two who are taking our learning experiences. So on the teaching side, you're the one that's kind of giving the feedback and doing the grading, but on the instructional design side, you're getting feedback either from your internal team or people that are involved in the project as well. And teaching most of the time, not in a post-COVID world, but most of the time is in person. So you have those synchronous sessions in person. You're seeing this again, seeing the same people every day. Whereas in instructional design, the modalities can vastly vary from hybrid to blended to VILT to asynchronous, synchronous, and a combination of these. So those modalities really in the instructional design world vary quite vastly. And if you think about it, you can probably see that some of these skills or some of this information, you can definitely translate what you know about lesson planning into project management. So I just want to make that clear, because sometimes when I have conversations with educators, they're like, well, how do my skills translate? And that's what you really have to think about. So if you know how to plan a lesson or you can plan out a unit, you're be able to take that skill and upskill and get more comfortable as an instructional designer and project manage, because you know what you're trying to get to. You know the end result. It's just a little bit of a different experience. One of my favorite people in this industry is Julie Dirksen, and we read her book in my classes, and she was one of the first books that I read when I transitioned into an instructional design role, and I love this quote from her because it really speaks to about the learning experiences. As a formally trained educator, I can't stress enough how much the learners and the participants are the most important and should be the center of what we do, no matter the industry. And Julie says that learning experiences are like journeys. This journey starts where the learning is now, and it ends where the learner is successful. The end of the journey isn't knowing more, so it's not just knowledge sharing; it's doing more. So like behavioral changes, understanding like if you've upskilled in a certain role. And I love this quote from her. And if you don't know Julie, she's fabulous. Connect with her on LinkedIn. Go to her site, Usable Learning. She has 2 books out designed for how people learn. Um, Talk to the Elephant, which she just came out with. I'm going to be interviewing her on my podcast coming up, and I can't wait to get more information about that because I read her other book. But she's a great professional to follow in this industry. I see some questions coming in. I will wait on the questions. So one of the things I want to know from you is you're at this session. Why are you interested in instructional design? What prompted you to join this session? What prompted you to start thinking about instructional design maybe as a role, or you're just starting to explore it and maybe incorporate it into a current role that you have? Especially people, I talk to a lot of different industry professionals in the human resources department, in the training department. They're like, we don't have an instructional designer on our team. How do we do this in our roles? We're onboarding people, or we're trying to help people understand different systems. So what can we do? So why are you interested in instructional design? I see some people typing. Corporate training department. Nice. Want to improve systems of education. Want to better my own material. Me too. I love the fact that I'm an instructional designer because it really causes me to think very purposefully about how I design my online classes, about how I design whatever experience that my students are going through. I don't know what I would do if I wasn't an instructional designer. So I really like these responses. I want to design my own, want to better my own material for sure. Awesome. All right. All right, so let's talk a little bit, and I don't want to get too involved in these different sectors because there's a lot, and there's some that I probably don't even have on here. So, what are the various sectors when it comes to instructional design? What are we looking at here? So, these are the main ones. The 2 biggest ones in our industry are education and corporate, obviously, because we have K to 12, and we also have the corporate environment, the organizations that exist, the smaller ones, the larger ones. Um, that exists. So education and corporate. Then we have freelance, which is basically working for yourself and getting jobs, getting contracts, and working your own hours and keeping track of your different projects. Freelancing is very good for somebody who's looking to have their own schedule, and or somebody who's looking to transition into this field and just gain some experience in the field, because a lot of the time, and I don't like this, you'll see from different job descriptions is even at entry level positions, they're looking for at least 1 year experience. Freelancing is a great way to get that experience. So you can work with, maybe you have a connection at a school where they have you design a learning experience for teachers, or they have you do something for their human resources department or some other department. Use your connections. And also there's things like Upwork where you can apply to freelance roles and just get that experience in instructional design. And then we have government and nonprofit. So a lot of different companies, the government, I saw a listing for a job in the Department of Education for an instructional designer, which I hadn't seen before. So it's really cool to see that in the Department of Education and in other government entities that instructional DoD and instructional designers are a valuable part of those teams. And nonprofit, in the nonprofit sector, when you're looking for either small nonprofits or larger nonprofits, they want instructional designers too, people to train others or develop learning experiences on how to use their tools, how to help the nonprofit employees, the internal people that need need the assistance with using different systems and navigating those spaces. And then finally, on the peripheral here, I put ed tech, because ed tech encompasses so many different things when it comes to instructional design. If you think about the ed tech industry, there's roughly in the United States, I'm not sure worldwide, I need to look up that statistic. There's about 1,500 ed tech companies in the United States, and that's just growing by the day. So you could be an instructional designer for an ed tech company where you're designing learning experiences for those who are using the tool, and or training the sales agents or the sales accountants who are going out, train the trainer type activities. So ed tech is one that's definitely related and definitely huge when it comes to a sector of instructional design. I put it kind of out there on the peripheral just because it's not necessarily instructional design, because you have different titles: training specialist, curriculum developer, e-learning developer. Depending upon the organization, your role will vary. There's, like I said, there's more to this, but I want to make sure that I don't dive too far into them. Um, and if you want, we can definitely have a chat offline if you're interested in a certain sector. I recently did a chat between corporate, talking about the differences between being in education instructional design and corporate instructional design. So I'm happy to have those conversations as well. Currently in the United States, there's about 100,000 of us. Pre-COVID, this number was extremely much lower. And I'm proud to say that the instructional design industry, as I mentioned at the beginning, is continuing to grow, and people are becoming more and more interested in this community. And it is such a great community that's full of welcoming people who just want to make lives better for others. We want to make learning experiences, we want to make these immersive things. We want to make sure people feel comfortable and confident in their roles. They feel comfortable and confident in their lives, because instructional design is used for all types of training, whether that's something that's internal to your job or that's something that's external where you're learning about something with life, mental health. And there's 100,000 of us and continuing to grow. So it's wonderful. I keep going backwards. My brain's working backwards today. All right, so let's chat a little bit before we get into some of the resources, some common questions I get asked, and I kind of crowdsourced a little bit when it came to some of these common questions, as to what types of things do I need to know about instructional design, or do I need a certificate, or do I need this, or do I need that? So you want to be an instructional designer. How do you start that process? What does that look like? I think one of the first things I tell people, if they're looking to get into a role in instructional design, you got to figure out what sector you want to be in. You got to do a little bit of research and figure out, like, well, do I like the corporate space where it's more fast paced, or do I like the education space where maybe I'm coming from an education space and I feel more comfortable, that feels more in my wheelhouse. So you definitely have to do a little bit more. You have to do some more research before you decide. One of the questions I have, and this is definitely important to people: what do you think the average salary is of an instructional designer in the United States? And it's important. Salary transparency is very important, especially in the United States. And I've seen this become more important worldwide as I'm doing some international roles about the average salary when it comes to instructional design. This is our livelihood. This is our retirement. We want to know what the salaries are for listed roles. We want to see that put into the job description, and or we want to ask that when we go into the interview stages. So we got about 40% think it's about 60,000, and then the rest we got 80, 90, and 55. All right. So the average salary in the United States for an instructional designer is roughly around $81,000, $82,000, which is really, really is pretty good, depending upon the location that you're in. If there's a higher cost of living, that might need to be upped a little bit. But if you're at, an area in the United States where the cost of living is low, this is a great salary. And it does vary by sector. So be conscious of that if you're looking into the various sectors and you're considering salary. So you'll see that corporate and government pay roughly around the same when it comes to the average salary. Higher education and education in general is notorious for giving people a lower salary. Due to regulations and budgets and all those different things. So you will make a little bit less if you're going into the education space when it comes to instructional design. But there are places where you can make up to six figures and close to that. You just have to find the right organization or the institution that is willing to give you, especially if you come in with experience, the higher salary range. And just as a point of reference, the average teacher salary in the States is about $66,000. So most of these are above what the average teacher salary is. And I know when I first started teaching back in 2007, my salary was about $43,000. So that was pretty low. Um, and now, I'm happy to see it's gone up. It hasn't gone up enough, obviously, for all that teachers and educators do. But just to give you an idea, when you start searching or you start thinking about different sectors, this is, if you want to know the salary range, this is the average. And Devlin Peck put this together. He does an instructional design salary report every year. And I pulled this information from his report. So thank you to Devlin for pulling this together. All right. So the first question I usually get asked is, do I need to update my resume? And you absolutely 100% need to update your resume. This may not be the first thing that you do, but this is definitely something that needs to be in progress if you're thinking about transitioning to an instructional design role. Having a teacher resume isn't going to cut it. Unfortunately, you're going to have to change some wording to kind of fit the instructional design sector. Maybe if you land a freelance role, you can add that to it, but you do need to update your resume. And one of the things I have seen recently in doing some different reviews is that you don't need to put your address on there. Your email, you need to have a LinkedIn, you need to have a portfolio. Linked out to your website, something like that. But 100%, if you haven't updated your resume in recent years, please do that. Please take some time to update that resume, put in your new roles, especially for some of us who's been in the industry for a while. We forget that, like, oh, I haven't updated my resume or my professional experiences on LinkedIn. Make sure that you do that so that you can keep track of all the wonderful things that you're doing and the professional experiences you have, along with the skills that align with those professional experiences. So definitely, yes, you need to update your resume. I remember in high school, we used to put our address on there, and it's just crazy now how much it's actually changed. So make sure that things are up to date. And there's lots of different templates and things out there that you can use. And I have a resource that I will share with you that you can that has like a resume template that you can use for free. Do I need a portfolio? Yes. I would say absolutely you need a portfolio to showcase your work. And one of the questions that I get asked most frequently is what do I include in the portfolio? And my initial response is multimodal. So do you have presentations? Do you have static documents, maybe where you designed a curriculum or a unit, and it shows that you put some thought in behind the different topics and the subtopics that are involved in that? Have you done videos? Have you designed e-learning experiences that you can link to? Have you gone out to maybe iSpring or Articulate and used their free trial and designed a learning experience that you can use in your portfolio? So I definitely say yes, you need a portfolio, especially if you're going into the corporate sector. And I'm seeing this more and more for the education sector as well. When it comes to instructional design, they want to see some sample work. And I do realize that a lot of our work can be proprietary. So I encourage you, just for practice, to do a project yourself. Maybe take on Articulate, the e-learning heroes. They do like monthly challenges. Maybe do a challenge and then you have a portfolio piece. Or join Tim Slade's e-learning designers community and maybe do a challenge of his and get involved into doing different things there. Okay, this is a tricky question, and another one I get asked quite frequently is, do I need to get another degree or a certificate? Sometimes, yes. I would say if you're going, and we all know this from the educators in the room that are in academia, we know that credentials in education are very highly valuable across our industry, and people want to see that you got your bachelor's, you got your master's, maybe get your doctorate, maybe get some certificates. So I would say if you're going into the education sector, maybe the nonprofit or the government, it might be worth it to get another degree, but I'm not saying run out there and do it. I'm going to say again here, do your research and figure out if there's a situation where if you're working for a certain company or higher education institution, they will pay for you to go back to get your master's degree. So don't go into that student loan debt. Maybe ask them if they do tuition remission, and that way that's a benefit for you working for the industry. You can have a role with them, and then they will also pay for you to, upskill and get that degree if that's something that they want. Certificates are great. There's a lot of different credentials and things that are out there. Everybody has a micro credential, everybody has some sort of certificate. Some of my favorite ones, if you're thinking about doing different certificates, Idle Courses Academy with Robin Sargent is a well known and recognized certificate across the industry. She has an accredited school, and then also, too, the ATD certificate in instructional design is also a well-known one. So if you are thinking about that and you want to go into like the corporate space, definitely a certificate will help, say like, I understand instructional design, I understand the different modalities, I understand different theories and stuff. So I would definitely say you could upskill, and you could also learn a little bit more through those certificates. And I say maybe. Again, it depends on where you go. Do the different research, look at the job description, seeing what they require. People on my Amazon team, we go from having somebody has a high school diploma all the way up to a master's degree. It really depends on the value of what you bring to the table in terms of skills, in terms of experience. So I would say do your research and make sure you find out what they're requiring, and if they do require something, see if there's some sort of situation there where you can get a benefit for like tuition remission, or get them to pay for your next degree. And this is another great question, and one that is very difficult for me to answer. What technologies do I need to know? I want to caution you that technology comes secondary to understanding our industry. Technology is a supportive person in our role. So like the backstage crew at at the theater, that is what technology is. It helps us to design these learning experiences. It's not everything. So simply knowing the technology isn't going to get you the role. You have to understand how andragogy works, what that is, how that's going to impact learners, how to evaluate the training courses, taking that feedback into consideration, because instructional design is very iterative. So knowing e-learning authoring tools is great, like iSpring, Articulate, learning management systems, Canvas, Cornerstone, the different corporate and education, depending on what you go into. You have to have an awareness of these. And I say know enough just to be dangerous. Know enough that you can speak to what the technology can do, but also know the limitations to what it can do and how you're able to navigate those barriers when it comes to limitations. Because again, there are tons and tons of technologies on the market, and you're not going to be able to be an expert in every one. It's going to take a while for you to understand the nuances and the ins and outs. But hopefully, if you find a great company, which I have found at Amazon, um, they will allow you time to upskill. They will allow you time to work with the products that they use and figure out how to use these in a way that is suitable for your role, and also that you can design these immersive and engaging learning experiences for your learners. So there's a lot. If I had to make a list, it'd probably be about 50 pages of things you need to know. And then also too, just being an awareness of our industry and how it constantly changes. That's the one thing about instructional design, is it's very abstract and it also changes constantly. So you have to be comfortable and be able to assimilate to the different changes, and also you have to know a lot about accessibility too. I didn't mention accessibility, but that's a big part of our industry, is following accessibility guidelines and making learning experiences accessible for all. So a lot. So a lot is my answer. All right, we've come to my favorite part of the presentation, all the resources, the steps and the tips, the things that you can do to things you can look at, steps you should take if you're transitioning into a role. I broke it down a little bit for us so that we don't feel overwhelmed by the process. So I said, the first thing you should do is find your niche, research the roles, remember the sectors. These are my 7 tips. LinkedIn, there's nothing that can take the place of old school networking, whether that's out on LinkedIn World or if you're connecting with people in your current industry, and they might know somebody that knows somebody. So I would definitely say networking is a huge part of that. Start thinking about those work samples. Remember what I said about developing a portfolio, gathering those things that are not proprietary that you can share out to the public, or you can share with, potential job potential organizations or industries. Get those things together. Update your resume. You notice how I sit. You notice. I want you to notice something about this screen. Work samples and portfolio and resume are not the first thing you do. They're not the first thing you do. I think there's a common misconception that if those are the first things you need to do, but I feel like you first need to know where you're going. You first need to take the steps. You need to figure out where you're stepping to, what path you're taking. Then you need to make a plan and remember that part of this process is that sometimes you're going to feel like you're not making any progress at all when really in reality you are. So where you're starting isn't where you're finishing. Apply to the roles strategically. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten notes in my LinkedIn inbox that people say, I've applied to 250 roles and I have gotten one interview or no interviews. Well, if you play the lottery and you buy 100 tickets or 50 tickets, you still have the same chances of winning. The statistics are still the same. So apply strategically when you find that niche, apply in that area that you want to be in. Is it in the healthcare industry, in the corporate sector? Is it in education in the K to 12 space? Is it in elementary ed? So figure out where you want to be and apply to those roles in the sector you want to work in. Track what you're doing, because you're going to get overwhelmed, and you're going to find that there's a lot of different things that you want to do, and you need to follow up, and you need to share this and you need to share that. So track what you're doing. And I have a great resource that I'm going to share that will help you with that. And then what's next? After you do all this is when the interview process and then getting the role. So there are more steps to this, but one at the beginning stages, the 7 tips at least, this is what you need to do. And this is what I found that's worked for people that I've coached or worked with to help them land the role. All right, my top 5. Here we go. This is what I use. This is what I share with people. I have more information. So my top 5 resources, my first go-to resource. If you're thinking about this industry, you need to read What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer by Dr. Luke Hobson. Luke Hobson is a very dear friend of mine. I met him in LinkedIn World about 4 years ago, and he wrote this wonderful book, and it shares all the things with you. It shares about his story. It shares about how to get into the industry. Luke's in higher education at MIT, so he gives some higher ed tips if you're looking to get in that industry. But he also shares the nuances about instructional design, what you need to know, where to go, like how to navigate this space. So wonderful read, really easy read, great book. The Job Tracker for Teal. If you've never heard of Teal HQ, it's a job site. It has so much information. One of the things I love about it is the job tracker. So you can download a Google add-on that where you can keep track of roles you want to apply to, and then go in and track when you're applying them, if you get an interview, if you get rejected, all those different things. That's the tracking piece. Sites, Skip, remote. It's a remote job site. It was started out for remote ed tech jobs, but Chelsea has curated jobs. She has so many jobs now, and most of them are 60,000 plus, and they're remote. And it will tell you if you have to travel. They're in instructional design, they're in LXD, they're in curriculum development, they're in e-learning, they're in ed tech. So Chelsea's site is one I recommend. Teamed by Ashley Loney is another one. It's a job search portal. You can put your profile in there. You can say you're open to work. She has a job board. She shares out roles. And again, another wonderful site where you can put in information. You can find what's available out there, especially if you want to do some freelancing. And then the final one is curated resources for those transitioning into instructional design. So about 2 years ago, I started curating some resources, and I have a Google Doc that I can share with everybody that has all this information in it that I'm sharing here. And it shows you like where to get started, who to follow, what YouTube pages to go to, different articles that I find useful. And it's just a whole list that I update quite frequently that includes anything and everything instructional design, especially for teachers looking to transition into this industry. And now we're here. What are your questions? Let me open up the chat here. All right. Finished a little bit later than I wanted to, but that's okay. All right, so let's see. The first question I see in the chat is, do you find a meaningful difference in terms of the principles of good learning for children versus adults? To me, the principles seem the same, although the course of the context makes a difference. Yeah, I definitely do see that. Um, I, I mean, if you can design a great learning experience for younger learners, you can definitely translate that into something for adult learners. I think it just takes a little bit of thought. Um, and I find that the most valuable learning experiences when I was in the classroom is when they were having fun and I was having fun. And I find that for adult learners too. Like when we're both learning at the same time and we're both having fun and we're both very stimulated when it comes to learning experiences. But with adult learners, I find like they want that to be completely applicable to what they're doing now. Like you want to turn around right now if you're thinking about transitioning to a role instructional design, and you're going to go find those resources and you're going to start doing your research so you can go start taking action. Great question. Found there's not a huge difference between adolescents and adult learners. Yep. Nope, that's true because they're pretty much like the brain hasn't fully developed around 25 or 26 according to psychology, but yes, there is commonalities between the both. That's why I'm saying these two, it's not like in a vacuum, they're not siloed necessarily. It's just in context, if you're dealing with 5-year-olds as opposed to 25-year-olds, there is a difference. Okay. What other questions we got in here?
We've got one that's just come in.
Okay.
Current high school teacher wanting to transition here. So glad to see the industry is growing. Do we also see saturation happening?
Yeah, I would say in recent years, especially in a post-COVID society, we do see saturation happening. So you have to do a little bit more digging when it comes to certain roles, and not every job site has every role listed. So you're going to have to navigate multiple job sites in multiple areas to figure out, where all the different roles are. I can't speak enough to going if like I know I want to work at Google is your goal. You need to go to Google site directly. You need to find what roles are listed on there and then apply to the roles directly on their site. Or if you have like your top 5, go to those 5 sites. If you know you want to work at University of Michigan because you're a huge Wolverines fan, you need to go to University of Michigan and you need to apply directly on their site. I mean, LinkedIn and other job sites, they do some great things, crowdsourcing and stuff like that, but I can't say enough just going directly to the source. And not a lot of people do that. So saturation would be a non-issue there. Let's see.
Seems to be all the current questions, but if you've got a question, now is the time to drop it into the chat.
I love all the chat that's happening here. Yeah, right, Daryl. If you apply to 250 positions and you don't get interviews, it means something's wrong with your resume or application. Yeah, yeah, or just the process in general. It's not that it's wrong to apply at a lot of different places, but I feel like these easy applies make it feel like you're doing something, and you're putting yourself into a pool of like a ton of different people. Um, and while it's easy, you want to make sure that it's getting through. You're following up. You're talking to the people. You're networking with the people that already work there. Maybe asking about the environment, stuff like that.
So we've only got a couple of minutes, but I thought this was a great question. Is there anything you'd advise not including in your portfolio? What not to do? I'm tempted to make a video on that myself because I've always done it the other way. I'll make a note there, but you can answer this.
Yeah. So I would say obviously the stuff that's proprietary you cannot include in your portfolio, things that you've agreed to not share from your industry. And this is a wonderful question. I would have to definitely think on this more. Um, you know, I wouldn't say include like older stuff because I feel like at a certain point you should have updated something. So not something from like 10 years ago when you were a teacher, or, 15 years ago when you first started out in the industry. You want to include more modern, more relevant things of what's happening here. Like for example, I know simulations in e-learning are huge nowadays. Those real life like click paths and figuring out how to navigate certain systems. So don't include the old stuff, include stuff that's relevant and see do some research, see what other people are including. Don't steal their stuff. Another thing not to include, don't steal other people's stuff. I've seen that too. That's very, bad. That's a good question.
We'll call this the last question. Any tips on having a clean portfolio?
Mm-hmm. Pick your top 5. Pick your top 3 to 5 things that you want to include. I use Google Sites to house my portfolio. They have templates. Use a template. That's the way to make it clean. Don't if you don't feel comfortable coding or you don't feel comfortable, designing the website yourself, use a template because most of them have been vetted through WCAG and other standards, and they're going to be clean. So something like Canva to build a website, like I said, the Google Sites, and this is all free, and it's easy to do. I think I designed my little site in about 15 minutes or less.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us today. And
You're
thank you to
welcome.
everyone for being so involved in the chat. This has been a great session. Our next one is in just 15 minutes, and it is our final session of the day.
Awesome.
We'll be being joined by Heidi Kirby,
I
working with
love
subject
Heidi.
matter experts. So Heidi's presented at almost every IDTX event, and each time she comes in and shares the research that she's been working on that year.
Hmm.
So it's always a real highlight because we have a general lack of good research being talked about in our area. There's lots of research done, but then there's far too little communication of said research in our profession. So great session coming up. Holly, thank you again. Thank
Thank
you, everyone
you,
else.
Tom.
We shall see you all again very soon.
All right, bye.
iSpring is an e-learning software provider dedicated to streamlining e-learning worldwide. With a team of top industry specialists, they create tools that make e-learning both efficient and enjoyable. Their AI-powered course creation tool, iSpring Suite, and the iSpring Learn LMS are the top choices for thousands of instructional designers, L&D pros, and content developers. Crafted with the user workflow in mind, iSpring ensures a seamless experience for the creation of impactful learning content. Their website, ispringsolutions.com, offers a treasure trove of e-learning resources perfect for those seeking to boost their L&D career or elevate their organization's e-learning practices. You can check out the iSpring Solutions website using the link in the description below.